views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Okay, welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a very big show today. Starting out, we have a well-known national attorney, Ben Crump, a trial lawyer for justice. He's going to be talking about the recent Bronx fire and his representation of the families as a result of the tragedy. We also have two assembly members who are going to be joining us. Catalina Cruz, she's going to be talking about legislation she's trying to impose that will allow immigrants to get professional licenses as you and I would be able to get them, which is so very, very important. Certainly we're in such a need for workers like nurses and teachers. We also have an assembly member who has not been on the show, Jessica González-Rojas. She's going to be talking about the restaurant industry and increasing a minimum wage and hopefully the sharing of tips with respect to those who are working so hard for us during the pandemic. So stay tuned. Today's verdict has so much more coming up now. All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have with us today Ben Crump from a trial lawyer for justice. Ben, how you doing today?
Hey, David, other than losing my voice, I'm okay, brother. How you doing?
Doing well. You sound good to me. Let's get right into this fire in the Bronx, if you could. Certainly a tragedy. We had Senator Chuck Schumer on the show a couple of weeks ago just talking about the different legislation that he's trying to pass to try and hopefully make sure that issues like this never happen again. Tell us how you got involved with representing those who were injured, if you could.
Certainly. Thank you for having me. As you all know, many of the victims of the Bronx apartment fire, this horrific tragedy, was people of African descent. And one of the things I always try to do is speak truth to power. This is one of the things that I have built my career on, trying to give a voice to the voiceless. And so when I think about what happened in that fire, how the safety rules were skirted, how people were not given the basic simple requirements of having heat. I mean, they in freezing winter, a lot of them were without heat. So they had to resort to space heaters. And we know that those space heaters are things that are very flammable. They cause combustible, unexpected sparks that cause fires. And so once that happened, then you had people who alleged that the smoke detectors were not, properly installed to give signals to notify them of the harm. And then the windows did not open completely up so they couldn't have escape and have any egress to get away from the fire without having to try to go through the fire. And so it was, unfortunately and tragically, a perfect storm of events that led to this just terrible, terrible tragedy of people who most vulnerable in New York society.
Yeah, and Mr. Crump, I know that 17 people passed away. You're right, most of them were immigrants from Gambia and from other parts of West Africa. How about the door that didn't close? The door that stayed open. How did that really contribute to the issue?
There are a lot of things that we're still investigating, but the door that didn't close, one of the things, most of the people who died from the fire did not die from being burnt, but they died from smoke inhalation. That meant they died a painful, long, God awful death. I mean, you're talking about children screaming for their mothers in the thick of smoke that made it where they could not see. And so the door that would not close was very problematic, because even if you tried to escape or do things from the smoke, you couldn't escape it.
Let me ask you a question in terms of who's responsible here. Usually when you're bringing action against a premises, you look at the landlord, you could look at anyone from the city. It depends on who owns the property. Who seems to be the one who's responsible for the tragedy, in your opinion?
Well, we always start from the top down, because as we all learned from Watergate, you follow the money. You had these investors, people who, live very comfortable. They have no problem with heat. All the code regulations in their townhouses and condominiums are enforced and followed, but they invest in properties where people who are what the Bible referred to as the least of these are required to live, because they have no other way to be able to afford expensive housing in New York City. And so there are a lot of government subsidies. So these investors know that they're going to get their money. And it's so sad that they look at profit line over people. They look at quarterly returns over safety. And so we are starting at the top with saying those investors cannot simply say, well, we pass the responsibility on to the people beneath us. We don't trouble ourselves with those things. Where I am trying to make sure that we put those dead babies' bodies right at their doorstep. They cannot wash the blood off their hands.
How does it look? Does it look like it's going to become some type of class action where one judge is just going to hear all these cases, the way the Harlem explosion case ended up happening? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, David, that is my belief, that it will become a class action, that all the residents that were affected by this tragedy. Remember, there's a lot of psychological injuries there for the fact that people watch their loved ones die. Screaming out to them in the thick of the smoke. And, a lot of these were children. We have to remember that these were parents having to bury their children, the most unnatural thing that we know in all of life. Children are supposed to bury the parents.
So when Senator Schumer was on, and we interviewed him in person, actually, he suggested that, it should be mandatory that these space heaters automatically have a shutoff, that doors have to be inspected and be closed, and sprinklers be installed into all these different buildings in the Bronx that, were built before 1972. What are your thoughts on making sure that this doesn't happen again in terms of legislation that the federal government is trying to pass?
I think Senator Schumer is showing great leadership in trying to have these mandates that we can prevent these preventable deaths and these preventable injuries from ever happening again. I look to Mayor Eric Adams to exemplify also that leadership in this tragedy. It happened when he first came into office. So what he can do is make sure going forward that it doesn't happen. And we must remember, David, that this is not the first time you had a catastrophic fire in an apartment building in the Bronx, in the lower socioeconomic community. Yeah. And they did not learn from that history. And when we don't learn from the mistakes in the past, we are doomed to make them in the future. And these history lessons are costly to those who are most vulnerable. I cannot state that enough. This would never happen in the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
Mr. Crump, one last question for you, because I know you got to go. Let's say some of the viewers are watching right now, and they feel that they may have been affected by the fire, or they think they may have some kind of issue, how do they contact you? How do they let them know? How do they find you?
Well, the easiest thing, David, is beingcrump.com. If they go to the website, there are people who they can communicate with immediately. And then also, I'm on social media at Attorney Crump. They can find us any way that I think is phone number, computer, church fans. David, they can find me, brother. Thank you.
Okay, but listen, Mr. Crump, thanks so much for being here. You're doing a real great service for the people of the Bronx, and we hope to have you back.
Hey, when I get my voice back, David, I promise you, I'll come back, brother. Thank you.
Stay with us. Today's Verdict has a lot more coming up right after this. All right, welcome back to today's Verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have returning to the show, Assemblymember Catalina Cruz. How are you doing today, Catalina?
Good morning, David. I'm doing well, and I hope you are too.
We are. And again, thanks for coming back. We always like repeat guests. So let's get right into this Empire State Licensing Act. Tell the viewers a little bit about it and what was your impetus to push forward type of legislation.
I'm glad to be back. I had a great time the last time we were on the show, and I think it's a great opportunity to have conversations about the law that people can relate to. So this particular bill was born out of the need to protect dreamers and their licenses, and to give more folks who are ready to be part of New York the opportunity to do so by having a professional or a skill-based license, but who may not have a documentation status. And so what happened about 4 or 5 years ago is that the former president decided to end or attempt to end a program called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And what that program under President Obama had done was give people who grew up like me, because I grew up undocumented, the opportunity to have a work permit and not be deported. And these are young people who, for all intents and purposes, are as American as you and I. They had gone to school here, worked here, contributed to the community, and this is the only country they know as home. And many of them, during the time that the program was safe, if you will, had gone on to go to college, get professional licenses, become doctors, lawyers, nurses, hairdressers, barbers. And I say all of those because it wasn't just people who had professional licenses like you and I, but they also had skilled-based licenses where they learned to do things that were that the state would give you a permit to do. And then what happened once DACA, the former president attempted to end DACA, is that all of those professional and skilled-based licenses were in jeopardy. And what we did with this bill is say, no matter what happens with this particular program, your license is your license. We removed from the language of various license requirements, the language that would say you have to submit your social security, you have to demonstrate that you're a citizen. All you have to demonstrate, because that's what the state should be doing, is that you can pass the test and you can do the job, and we will give you that license and we will protect that license. So it's a twofold a piece of legislation. Protects existing licenses if the federal government ever does away with the program, and allows people who may have not been able to partake in the program, but want to engage in that professional license and that skill-based license, but don't have a social security number, to be able to apply for it.
So I've done some research on the act and basically who is or would not be covered type of thing with respect to professional licenses. And one thing that the two different people that I see are nurses and teachers. And I can't think of anybody we need more, certainly in this city, than nurses, because we have an aging population, and teachers, because we have kids who need more and more teachers in the classrooms. Was that one of the main impetuses, or was it just many as a whole in terms of those who need professional licenses?
Look, I think it was many as a whole. And I will say the bill was written pre-COVID, and it just so happened that once COVID hit, it became two of the professions that we needed the most. The nurses for obvious reasons, and the teachers because there were so many kids who were learning at home and not enough teachers to cover that. It just became the thing that the professions that would be most benefited from it. But that was I guess, divine intervention, if you will.
Are there any requirements that are over and beyond what, say, you and I would have to do to get this professional license? Do you understand? I mean, is there anything more they have to show?
No, I think that's the entire purpose of it. You and I have to show, let's say, a list for lawyers. You have to take the bar exam. You have to pass your character and fitness, and you have to, of course, demonstrate that you went to law school and all that stuff. These folks would have to demonstrate the exact same thing. The only thing that gets removed is if you and I decided to go to let's say we pass the bill tomorrow, and you and I decide to go to law school, and I am undocumented and you're not. We go through the same process. And neither one of us has to show that we have a Social Security.
Yeah, I've been reading, as Congress works at the federal level to fix policies that restrict immigrants from participating fully in the nation's workforce economy, New York leaders have the power to override this unfair burden on the immigrant community. What's wrong with the federal level? Why can't they just get their act together is what I really want to know.
I mean, where do we start, David?
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, politics can get in the way of really good policy. There's this fear that if somehow we do or move policy that is seen as anti-American or anti the majority, that all of a sudden we're going to lose that Democratic majority. And what people in the federal government should be reminded about is that, first, we're the ones who got you there. You would have lost without thousands of immigrants going out to rally for you because they couldn't vote for you, and to vote for you because they became new citizens. And then there's the children of those immigrants. So if you don't keep your promises, if you don't actually do all of the things that you said you were going to do to protect immigrant communities, we're going to come back and it's not going to be pretty. And I don't want to see a day where I have to tell my federal colleagues, we told you so.
I want to take a step back with respect to the driver's licenses, because there was a time that we tried to push forth legislation to have those who weren't documented, give them the ability to drive. How did that, that looked like that worked out. How did that, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, David, that was almost a 10-year battle. So it worked out, but it worked out eventually. It was a very tough time. It went through several iterations of the legislation and several different main sponsors, because it took so long to have New Yorkers see that this was needed. It started way back when Spitzer was the governor. That's how long we've been fighting for it. And when it was actually implemented, it's worked great. Everything that we said would happen, which was people are going to go out, get a license. We're going to be able to feel like we're safer in the streets. It's everything that's what happened. I remember seeing on the news that the first month that we had a driver's license available for undocumented people, the DMV could not function. They didn't function well before, but they were so many people. They had lines and lines and lines because people wanted. If you give an immigrant an opportunity to become part of civic society, we're going to take it. And that's exactly what happened there.
All right, so final thoughts, because we have a lot of viewers who are watching. We'd love to hear from you. Somebody's watching today and they're like, you know what? Any tips that you could give me in terms of, wanting to make sure that I'm protected? What should I do just to maybe get myself ready so that I can become that nurse or I can become that teacher? Where do I stay tuned is, I guess, what I'm saying.
I think the most important thing people can do is go to your local elected, be your council member or assembly member, and ask to be referred to a nonprofit that can screen you for legal status. If you're already documented, maybe you can become a citizen. If you are undocumented, maybe there's another avenue for you. And if you are in school, in college, this is going to really be able to help you once you graduate, get a professional license if that's what you want, or a skill-based license. And I also urge our viewers who who are friendly to immigrant communities, who want to support immigrant communities, call your state senator, call your assembly member and ask them to sign on to this bill. It's called the Empire State Act, and to make sure that we get to pass it. I proudly carry it with Bronx's own Senator Gustavo Rivera, and I think we have a really good opportunity to do so this year. So make your calls and help us get it passed.
Assemblymember Catalina Cruz, again, thanks for coming back. And maybe you come back in a couple of months and let us know what's going on with this.
Would love to, David. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Absolutely. All right. Stay with us. Today's Verdict has so much more right after this. All right. Welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have with us Assemblymember Jessica González-Rojas. Assemblymember, thanks for being here.
Thank you, David, for having me.
It's the first time we've had you on the show, so we're excited. And we're going to be talking about small businesses, in particular restaurants. With the pandemic, was your district particularly hit hard?
Yeah, I represent the 34th Assembly District, which includes the neighborhoods of Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, Corona, and Woodside and Queens. Now, if you remember, that was literally the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. Just slightly out of my district is Elmhurst Hospital. That's where we saw those, the freezers and lines wrapped around the hospital to get care. It is one of the most diverse districts, if not the city, if not the state, I would argue the world. And we have such a vibrant immigrant population. And one thing that's important about my district and why I care so passionately about our local restaurants is because while I love my district, but I do not have a hospital within the bounds of my district. Like I said, Elmhurst is outside my district, but not too far. I don't have a senior center. I don't have a community center. I don't have NYCHA. I don't have a library in my district. But what I do have is the best restaurants in New York City, and I will fight anyone on that.
I believe I grew up in Queens, born and bred from the very beginning through the public school system. So I know Queens. It is the melting pot of the world, and it has absolutely the best food.
Absolutely.
All the best food, and it's probably centered right in your district. Would you say that, what percentage could you tell me of restaurants that maybe had to close or had to downsize during the bad, really bad time of the pandemic?
We really saw countless businesses close down, and our restaurants were most hardest hit. As we know, the service industry has been slammed by the pandemic. And some of the very few things that actually kept the restaurants alive is a program that I'm fighting for called the Restaurant Resiliency Program.
Could you tell us about that? I've heard some very good things.
Yeah, so this is a program that actually allowed for some of these restaurants to survive in this moment. When no one was coming in, no one was ordering food, what they were doing were ensuring that the workers were still coming, so they were paying their workers. They were making food for local soup kitchens, for shelters, for other relief programs, for community fridges. And again, we saw great food insecurity during this pandemic, and we still see that. But the restaurants were the ones that stepped up. And the Restaurant Resiliency Program provided funding to those restaurants to be able to cover those costs of the meals and the employees to make those meals, to allow them to make the food to offer to those who were going hungry. So this is something I'm also champion. As I mentioned, restaurants are the lifeline and heart of my district, not just because I don't cook and I go with most of them to eat and feed myself, but because it employs our community. We have, again, a large immigrant community. These are mostly immigrant restaurants. You give me a country, I will take you to its food in my district. But these are the restaurants that kept not just our community going, but our hungry people fed. So I am fighting for $25 million to replenish the Restaurant Resiliency Fund so that we can continue this program that helps keep our restaurants in business that are still struggling, quite honestly, and make sure folks who are hungry are getting fed hot, delicious, nutritious meals.
I mean, let's be fair. The employees in the restaurant industry are not treated well. They are taken advantage of. They're the ones who are on the front lines. They're the ones who get on the scooters, who get to your house through Seamless or through the other apps and make sure that you can get the food that you have. My wife and I also, we really don't cook either. And we rely all the time on food delivery, but we do go out to the restaurant. So we're starting to go out now. Let's talk about wages.
Yeah.
In particular, what you're trying to put forth, the one fair wage. Could you talk a little bit about it, just broadly?
Yeah, so basically, our service workers that are tipped workers don't make minimum wage. They make under the minimum wage because it's expected that they're tipped in order to receive live. And quite frankly, that's part of like the vestige of slavery, right? We're not paying someone an equitable foundation wage, but relying on tipped their work to get funding. And this is something that's actually impacted women really viscerally, because oftentimes they're harassed. Let me see your smile. Let me see how outgoing you are.
Oh, and then if you do that, you'll get the
exactly. And the harassment rate of our women in the service industry is so high. And what one fair wage would do is ensure that our frontline workers, who are the waitress and waiters and the servers, are making at least the minimum wage, right? And it's a gradual bump to the $15 minimum wage. Ultimately, I would love to have them make more, but to get there, and then tips on top of that. And then this would allow, the one fair wage bill would allow the tips to be shared with the back of the house. In many restaurants, the front of the house is often white people, and the back of the house often are Black and brown immigrant workers. So it allows to share the tips amongst the whole staff, so that there's much more equity, but also bumps up the servers so that they're at least making a minimum wage.
And just so the viewers understand, that right now the back staff does not get any tips. They
don't get tips right now. They're actually not allowed to share tips with the back of the house.
Where's the pushback coming from? Where's the pushback coming from? The restaurant industry? Where's it really?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely pushback in the restaurant industry. And I actually have another bill that would actually support the restaurant industry in doing this. So I have a bill that would offer a forgivable loan to restaurants who have committed to paying this one fair wage. And I'll tell you one thing, the worker shortage that many restaurants are facing right now, they're seeing that their low pay is preventing them from gaining servers and cooks and all the things that the people that they need to keep their restaurants open. So some are voluntarily increasing their wages, some beyond even the $15 minimum, and they're going to $20, $22 because they're very desperate for staff. So for those restaurants, we want to reward them, and we would offer a forgivable loan to help them create a business plan, get training, racial and equity and gender equity training as well, to make sure that they're doing this equitably. And if they follow through and they have committed to paying the one fair wage, then it's forgiven. It's a grant. For those that don't, they got to pay the state back, because again, we want to make sure we're making that investment. So that would actually help the industry and the small business owners that own these restaurants to help and support them getting to that one fair wage standard.
That's good stuff. So hopefully you can come back maybe in the next couple of weeks, month or two. Let us know how both those bills may be.
Yes, absolutely. And I hope to get my restaurant resiliency program in this budget, which we'll find out in a couple of days on April 1st.
And it's a lot of money, and it would be very useful. So
it's and again, it's good for the economy. It's good for our community. It's good to serve the people who have struggled the most with this pandemic.
Thanks so much for being here. We hope to see you soon.
Great. Thank you, David.
All right, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this. Okay, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank our three guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you have a topic or an issue you would like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until the next time, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you in 2 weeks.